Welcome to Cars on Call. I'm Steve Schutz. I'm very excited to be here with Adams and Stephan. Adams, how are you and where are you?
I'm good. I'm actually in an unused bedroom in my home in Santa Rosa Beach, Florida, where it's sunny and filled with spring breakers.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah. I drove to work yesterday and coming down I-65, it was bumper to bumper for 45 miles of everybody headed to Florida, it seemed like.
Well, they're already here. Yeah, they've arrived. Yeah.
That must be
And half of them are at Publix.
Oh, it's got to be just completely miserable.
We sort of camp out. Marshall will do enough grocery shopping for a week or so, and we'll just kind of hang out and not venture out of the driveway.
Jeez.
Yeah, but we're getting out of here soon enough. Steph, how are you, man?
I am great. I'm at my neighbor's house once again. Beautiful weather down here, just spectacular. We had a lot of wind yesterday, but today was a 70-degree day. Unfortunately, I was at the hospital yesterday and today, but I did get out and get a little run yesterday. And so best time of the year to live in Alabama is these couple of weeks right here. And it's going to be hotter than hell.
Beautiful. I went skiing today. This is my last ski day of the season. I'm in Sun Valley and I skied and the conditions were perfect. A little bit of sunshine. I got a little bit of a sunburn. Perfect snow. Perfect weather. It was like 25 degrees up on the mountain. Just great. I loved it. So it was great. Anyway.
Yeah, so for me, a satisfying ski season is always finishing without a toboggan ride and my boots on, man. So I love that when I finally get to the bottom at the end of ski season, I'm like, yes, I made it through without another trip to the hospital.
Amen. Well, good for you. And yeah, sorry you missed today, but hey, we've got a lot to talk about today. And I was really excited to read in the Wall Street Journal that Paul Newman, and of course, we spent a lot of time talking about Paul Newman when we had our very special guest, Dick Barber, on a few weeks ago. A lot of good stories. And if you weren't a Paul Newman fan before listening to that podcast, you would be after hearing the stories that Dick Barber talked or told. Just such a cool guy. I already thought he was cool. Adams, isn't it amazing the stories he told?
Yes, it is. And he tells them just like he's your granddad in the living room by the fire, just talking one-on-one. You know, he just so humble about his stories, and his recall is flat out amazing, I thought.
Yeah, I love the stories just because they're so interesting. I agree. He does sound like your favorite uncle, your favorite grandfather, telling the stories about a good friend of his who happens to be Paul Newman.
Right. And racing a 935 at Le Mans. Yeah, just a little hobby of his.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, June of this year, 300 mementos from Paul Newman's estate will be auctioned off by Sotheby's. And I can only imagine what the 300 mementos are, probably a lot of racing stuff. But the thing that really caught my eye, 2 vintage Rolex Daytona watches will be sold. Vintage watches are cool. Vintage watches that are Rolexes are even more cool. And vintage watches that are Rolexes from either Paul Newman or Steve McQueen are the apex of cool. So, Adams, let me start with you. I mean, these are going to be very expensive. They're cool.
Absolutely. And, you know, these transcend being timepieces. You know, they're collectibles, they're pieces of art, they're pieces of history. And of course, you get the star quality tie-in with the Paul Newman, which I put on the same pedestal as a Steve McQueen in the cool factor, the racing factor. And of course, you know, Paul Newman's Rolex that sold, I believe, around 2017 at the watch sale that had been James Cox. You know, that one set an astounding record at nearly $18 million for a watch. So whoever bought it is not using it to tell time. You can guarantee that.
And they don't know the person who bought it was kept anonymous as well. And they've never advertised that they have. It's the famous 6239 Rolex Daytona with the panda face, or it had the white face with the black subdials. And his wife gave him that watch he started racing at the time. And I think, I can't remember exactly, about 1960, I think was when she gave to him. So apparently Joanne Woodward, she bought it at Tiffany's. And on the back, she had it engraved for him as a reminder that when he was driving to be careful, and it says "Drive carefully, me" on the case back. And yep, he gave it to his at the time his daughter's boyfriend in 1984, who then sold it back in 2017. And I think it's the coolest watch of all time.
Before you go
That
into
white
that,
face.
Stephan, before you get to it, it sounded like you said, and you break it up a little bit. It sounded like you said he gave it to his daughter's boyfriend.
That's exactly what he did.
That's everybody.
Yes. In 1984, gave it to her. Gave it to him. But I think of all the Rolexes, and I've always known about the Newman Rolex with the white face. And I actually was in Kuala Lumpur, and I went to a street market, and I bought a fake Rolex Paul Newman for $25. And my plan had always been one day to get a real Rolex, but take the face out of this fake and in there. I probably could never find a watchmaker to do that for me. But I think it's the coolest of all the Rolexes.
So you actually want a resto mod watch? Is that what you're talking about?
Absolutely perfect. A resto mod watch, because I don't have $17 million to go to the auction next week or whenever it is to bid on one of these. But they're so coveted. Even ones that weren't owned by Paul Newman carry a fortune. They sell for a fortune. It's just that name is singularly attached to that white face, and just everybody wants that watch.
It absolutely is, and those are like the pinnacle of watches anyway. And the Daytona carries a huge cachet, without ever having been worn by Paul Newman. And there've been subsequent sales. I think James' timing of that, which a large amount went to charity, to his great credit, was perfect, because subsequent to that, they've had a 2020 sale where his and Steve McQueen's watches were auctioned. Paul's Daytona sold for 5.4, and McQueen's Heuer, not Tag Heuer, just Heuer back in the day, sold for 2.2. And then in late 22, Paul had a gold Rolex that brought only 800 grand. And so the values have probably come down just a little bit because they're diluted in numbers. It used to be, the Paul Newman Daytona, and now it's one of Paul Newman's Daytonas. Nonetheless, incredibly collectible. It will be fun to watch the results of that sale.
You can actually buy a Steve McQueen now, Tag Heuer, a Monaco, for actually a reasonable price, $4 to $5 grand. Maybe find one for $3. So it's not an original that he had, but they're still making the watches. But I put a Monaco on. So listeners, the Monaco is actually a square watch, and it's got the 2 subdials. So it's a racing watch. But even the originals they look on my little wrist. It looks ridiculous. It's like I'm wearing this box on my wrist. It just doesn't go well. But I do love the Monaco.
Stephan, man, I did the same thing. I walked into a pawn shop in a little town called Alexander City, Alabama. You guys may know where it is, but most of the world does not. And I walked in there, and he had some watches, and I said, would you happen to have any, a Tag or an Omega or something like that? And he pulls out a Monaco watch, an original. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have struck gold. I put it on my wrist, and it was so, and I'm smaller than you are. It looked like a TV set. I asked you, could I get antenna with it? So I had to walk out of there.
I know. I tried to wear one, and it's like putting me wearing a Casio G-Shock. It's just this ludicrous looking jewelry box looking thing on my wrist.
Well, Rolex is kind of the equivalent of Mercedes, and I think that Heuer and Omega are probably BMW, and maybe Audi. They're kind of the equivalent of that. But Rolex has always been kind of the conservative, but the watch to wear if you're somebody. And Paul Newman, I guess, only wore Rolexes his whole career. By the way, before we move on, the estimate for both these watches is between $300,000 and $500,000. That seems light.
I bet they go for more than that. It'll be, but it's not going to appeal to the next generation. They just want, they're going to equate him with salad dressing. But our generation of boomers, are going to think Steve McQueen is still cool. Now it's amazing, my Bullet Mustang, I get young kids all the time that go, "Oh my God, it's a Bullet. It's a Bullet." So the young kids know about Bullet Mustang, but I'm not so sure, but I think these watches, I'm sure there are some young kids that think these are great because they're associated with Steve McQueen and Paul Newman, but I bet they still go for big money.
Yeah,
it's going to be an old
I
guy
hope so.
like us.
Yeah, I think they'll be my prediction is 1 million each, just because not only are they super cool, but let's face it, Paul Newman stuff is going away as the time between us and when he died increases, and there's I think that there's less stuff that'll be up for sale, so therefore it's going to drive the prices up. So anyway, Adams, car spotting.
Car spotting. Well, I spotted only a partly car this week.
I know what that means.
1986 El Camino. Yes, sir. That is the mullet of automobiles, party in the business up front and party in the back with the half sort of truck bed. And this was of course, Chevrolet and Ford, who were duking it out all during, well, forever basically, but during the time of the launch of the El Camino, Ford had a Ranchero. I'm actually not sure who came first on that.
So tell the listeners, Adams, for the younger listeners, they may not know what we're laughing about.
Okay, well,
so describe. You got make a little visual for them, because we know what it is, but I think a lot of people don't.
Well, it was a car-based vehicle where they took the front of a then existing sedan. Both Ford and Chevrolet did this, and then they just basically removed the back seats, and in this very truncated version of a vehicle, that it's like they just left the trunk lid off. So there's a truck bed, a very shallow truck bed on the back of this, with just a bench seat, or maybe if you got the cool version, you got the buckets up front. And it looked, for all intents and purposes, from the front just like a car, but from the side you could tell things were radically different. And in the year in 86, the one that we're spotting, they had really become emasculated. They were certainly not muscle cars. They had a V6 base. They had a 305 V8, also wheezing out about 150 horsepower, and then they had a 350 V8, which put out a really brawny 170. But that was the car. And I'll tell you one thing about an El Camino, which is funny for me to bring this up. My wife is relatively car aware, just through osmosis, like your wives are, and like a lot of car guys whose spouse or partners are sort of become aware. She has gone on record as saying that is her least favorite automobile that has ever rolled the earth. And I asked her, she pointed it out. And one time I asked her, I said, so if when we'd met, if I was the exact same person and our first date, I came to pick you up in an El Camino, you're saying that you would have had that opinion? She said, I wouldn't even come out of the house.
Whoa.
Pretty hard.
Shots fired.
Exactly. So that's a car I've never owned.
They quit making them about 1979. They finally ran out of steam here in the U.S. But the Australians and the South Africans absolutely love these things. And Australia had one, the Holden. They call it the Holden Ute, UTE, short for utility. And that thing sold until 1980 in Australia. Pretty much the demise of until 2000. 19. What I'm saying. They sold until about they made them until 2016, but they were going to bring over the Ute. When you remember the Pontiac G8 that came, the Holden, the four-door sedan came. Yeah. So they brought that over. It worked well, kind of well. They didn't sell a lot, but they'd planned. General Motors was going to bring the Ute over from Australia as well. But when the economy crashed in 2008, they said no, they canceled it. But we almost got the Ute back from Australia.
And that was a real car, man. That was like, you know, the G8 was based on the Holden Monaro, and people, Holden was owned by GM, so it was, you know, pretty close to bedfellows at the time. And man, I thought the Ute version was super handsome, and they performed. They put, I don't remember the biggest V8 they put in it, but they
A 5-liter. Yep.
What,
Yeah, they put a 5-liter V8, 240 horsepower in that, and they love to hot rod those things down there too.
Yeah, the G8, the Pontiac G8. There was the Chevy SS, and of course the Pontiac GTO, which was based on the Monaro, which is what the Ute came off of. They were real performance cars.
And Ford had one over there too called the Ford Falcon Ute. Everybody just called it. They just call them Utes down there. But yeah, that's funny. You know, when I remember when they first seen those as a kid, and that's kind of like you just didn't know what you really were looking at. I never liked them. They're kind of cool now because they're so bizarre and they're so useless. But
hey, before we say that, I'd say kind of two things. Number one, I think this is a reverse mullet because it's kind of party in the front and business in the back. Because you know, you go to Home Depot, you stick everything in the back in the little pickup bed. So I think it's maybe a reverse mullet. I don't know if that's true or not. I guess if you're on a date, it's the opposite. But you know, if you're actually using it for work or going to Home Depot, then it's a reverse mullet. Number one. Number two, you know, they're back. There's a Ford Maverick and there is a Hyundai Santa Cruz, and they are car / truck, I think.
No, you're right. And you know, it's funny now that you say that, Steve, the El Camino and the Ranchero were way more car in the front and everything else about them. And then they just sort of had this obligatory bed sort of stuck on the back. Now these are like, they were more car. The new versions, the Maverick and the Santa Cruz are more truck. So they're like the reverse of the reverse. So it's a double reverse. And let's not forget
double reverse. My mind is spinning, Adams.
Exactly. We're viewing it inside out. You know, let's give credit where it's due to the Honda Ridgeline. You know, they sort of popped off, you know, they sort of popped off with the car-based truck earlier. Now it's become more truck-like. But anyway, so yeah, we're seeing.
Is anybody making these though? They're all 4-doors though, right? Even the Maverick, they don't make a 2-door. So they're 4-doors, yeah. So they're basically like now an SUV with a mini SUV with a truck bed in the back.
True.
I can see. All right.
And sadly, the Maverick just doesn't have like any towing capacity whatsoever. I mean, I think the base has a towing capacity of about 2,000 pounds, and you got to jazz it up with the right motor and the big towing package to get up to 4,000. So they're really not trucks.
Yeah, it's seriously like you can stick your dog back there, or you go to the garden center and you get all the plants that you need to plant for springtime, or you go to Home Depot, and it actually does make sense for that. I think they're great. I actually tested the Maverick not too long ago. I really liked it because instead of, you know, when I drive a big full-size pickup truck, I'm going to and from work, I feel like I'm just wasting gas and wasting all this space. Whereas with the Maverick, it felt like I was driving a little car that just happened to have, you know, some utility. So to me, they make a lot of sense. It makes a lot more sense to have 4 doors than it did the El Camino that you saw, which has 2 doors and not a lot of space for anybody. And then that bed, which you hardly ever use.
Right. And I agree with you. I tell you what, during the pandemic, when we were all a little bit crazy, I had started filling out an order for a Maverick, sort of as a do-all type vehicle, you know, something that would be, I had just gotten rid of a truck, a Toyota Tundra that I'd had forever, and just thought, you know, this would be a do-all vehicle. I consider them right-sized. You know, they're not too small, they're not too huge, and you know, sometimes unlike you guys who use your trucks as trucks, a lot of people have these, you know, 8,000-pound trucks lifted up. They can't even get through the drive-through. They can scarcely park them. They're getting, you know, 8 miles a gallon, and you know, you let a real recession come and you let oil go back to $130 a barrel, and I think you'll be getting a buy one, get one on the big fat trucks that people don't use as trucks. So the Maverick and the Santa Cruz probably perfectly timed.
there is a backup for Mavericks. You will not find them on any Chevy dealer lots. I guess the Hyundai Santa Cruz is not selling as well, but the Mavericks, you cannot find one on lots. They're still backed up. You still can't buy one. Meanwhile, you'll see plenty of F-150s on dealer lots, and GM announced that they are halting production of their Sierra and Silverado full-size pickups because of lack of sales. Their inventories are piled up. So the Maverick, I think you're right. I think it's like a sweet spot.
Mm-hmm. And pretty handsome. You know, to me, I think it's a way better looking vehicle than the Ranger version, and it's a whole lot better looking than GM's Colorado version.
True. So moving on, there's a topic I wanted to touch on because it really struck me. And, you know, it's the topic of automotive authenticity. I'm not sure how to bring up authenticity, except to say that we used to, I don't know if this is the right way to say it or not. We have a lot of it, and we've always had a lot of it, but the had it that we used to have made a lot more sense. And what I mean by that is you had authenticity, which I would define as people driving a vehicle that made sense for what they did and for their lives. And now you have people driving vehicles that are just as authentic as they used to be, but it's more to send a signal to their neighbors and friends than it is to be authentic. So I'll give you an example. You think of the 1960s when we were young, you'd have a plumber that drove a panel truck every day. And then you have a teacher that drove maybe a Plymouth or a Dodge. And then you had a doctor or lawyer would drive a Cadillac or Buick. And then the wife would drive a station wagon, usually Plymouth station wagon, or if they had more money, it would be an Oldsmobile. And at some point it switched to now where you've got the plumber still driving a truck, and but the doctor or the lawyer or the accountant or the teacher, you know, now all of a sudden maybe the teacher's driving a Jeep Wrangler, no intention of going to Moab or going off road, and his wife doesn't want a station wagon. The wife wants a Range Rover if it's somebody with money, or they want a Honda Pilot or a Highlander. These are vehicles that have a lot of capability, but they don't want a minivan, which is really much more of what they really need. So I find it interesting that you've got all these authentic vehicles, and we can all think of examples where they're not being used. You know, the Range Rover that does not go off-road, the Jeep Wrangler that does not go to Moab, and yet they're driven by the person that has a regular job. And of course, part of this whole conversation is in the old ways, in the 1960s, the husband worked frequently, the wife did not. Now you've got many more single-parent homes, and you've got wives who are the breadwinner in increasingly a higher percentage of our culture. So things have changed, but I find it interesting that these authentic vehicles used to be driven the way they were supposed to, and now they're driven just to signal something.
Well, I can't believe you left out the 4Runner.
I can't believe it too.
God knows a number of those things that don't do what they're not used for what they were designed for, and they're old and people love them. But you're right. You know, I call them posers. You know, I actually knew a guy. I'm not going to embarrass him and say his name, but a friend of mine had a 2-wheel drive Jeep. I didn't even know they made such a thing. It was jacked up with lights and this and that, and looked like it was ready to hit Moab, like you said, Steve-O, but it was 2-wheel drive. And like thinking, why would you buy? He bought it because it wanted to look cool. And guess what? He sold it to somebody, and a high school kid bought it. So I guess he grew up, and sold it. But you're right. People, they want to, they're wearing their Patagonia, jacket with their hiking boots, and they look like they're getting ready to go climbing or camping, and they climb into their Jeep, and they're actually just going down to Trader Joe's to pick up some dinner,
Steph, I sit here and I'll just admit before this automotively inclined audience, I didn't even know Jeep made a 2-wheel drive. And I guess I didn't want to know. I didn't even want to be aware.
This was a Wrangler. Yeah, this is the Jeep, the real Jeep, 2-wheel drive.
I didn't know the Wrangler could come in 2-wheel drive either.
It was. I couldn't. I looked at. I'm like, I looked and there's just a straight bar axle across the front. That's it. No transfer case. I'm looking. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I can't. First of all, I can't believe you bought a 2-wheel drive Jeep, and I can't. Like I said, I can't believe they even made it. But it's because their people want that look. You
And
know.
so I'm now even more horrified to know that they put a solid axle up front, so you can't get out of the mud, but you're guaranteed it'll ride terribly.
Yeah. Here is. I just looked it up. Jeep once sold a 2-wheel drive Wrangler from 2007 to 2010. Yep, for 3 years.
Well,
And
Steve, it's an
here's the
interesting
full title.
premise.
Jeep once sold a 2-wheel drive Wrangler, comma, and it was weird.
Hats off to the person that penned that, because that's right. It is odd, and it does go completely opposite of the authenticity question that you posed. And I haven't really thought about it, but then I'm thinking back in the marketing world that I used to occupy. I do remember when it was a point of pride when a couple of manufacturers or dealers would tell me, "Oh, there's that the new such and such of our brand." It is a category buster. In other words, that was an event, that was a laudable launch if it was a category buster, meaning that it sort of split between two things or maybe combined two things, a little bit like what we talked about earlier, but in a different way, to just sort of subdivide and cleave these categories into ever smaller, little thinner slices of the pie to appeal to someone they formerly did not appeal to. And I got to thinking about different cars, like what was like the most true to its mission type vehicle. And certainly the original work truck would have been it. The van, like you mentioned, the service van, the panel van, which I guess, is it now called a transit van? Is that the same thing, or
Yeah.
okay?
Or,
Well,
Nissan's got a version, Dodge has a version, Mercedes, they're all basically the same thing.
well, in today's society, I guess we're just probably a baby step away from having something that comes out called a trans van, but we'll leave that one alone for now. But to me, the car that was most true to its calling was the Checker Marathon.
Wow.
It was built to be a tank. It was built out of, I think, former tank parts, and it was the yellow cab for New York City and every big city that called itself sort of a cab-based people mover sort of society, well prior to the days of Uber and Lyft, et cetera. But the Checker Marathon was never meant to win any beauty contest, but it would win the durability contest, and that's what it did, and did it till its dying day.
I think that's great. It must have been out for 20 years. I mean, it was
Easily.
it was in the streets of New York. I grew up near New York, just on Long Island, and I saw checker cabs all the time. Every time I went to the city, you'd see nothing but checker cabs. That was the version of the yellow cab. I have a list of other what I would call really authentic vehicles, and I know you guys have lists too. But as I go through this list, guys, think of what it's supposed to be for, and think of how many people actually use it for that. I'll start with the Jeep Wrangler, which Stephan mentioned. There's the Land Rover Defender. There's the Sprinter that you just talked about, but I mean, even the Overlander Sprinter, like what our guest Andrew Clark has, he actually uses it, but many of these people don't hardly use it to go into the desert or something. The Porsche GT3, which is a track car, and then the Mazda Miata. How many people have any of those and use them for their intended purpose?
I've got a Miata sitting in the garage. What? You're mentioning those. One other came to my mind as you're talking about that. If I think about this, if you go in any big city and you get picked up by a private coach driver, what's it going to be? The black Lincoln Continental.
Yeah.
To me, that is a car that developed authenticity. It wasn't designed for that. It was more of a luxury car, but that's what that car became. And I think, but
now it's an Escalade or a Suburban, that they've kind of taken over the black car business. But, I do think that as society has changed, it used to be everyone had their defined roles. So I guess you didn't need a vehicle to tell society who you were. But now with everybody doing everything, especially the changes I talked about, women breadwinners are much more common than they used to be. And these women are not interested in driving a station wagon anymore. It's going to be an Audi or a Range Rover or a Land Rover Defender, maybe a Wrangler.
Well, and look how the buying public kind of turned against that, almost because they were too common. And I guess there was sort of a stereotypical, oh, it's the mom in the station wagon. And then that became in the 80s, oh, it's the mom in the minivan. And now people are just repulsed by the thought of that. Like, I mean, I can remember hearing young mothers say, who could have certainly used a minivan. Actually, we owned a Chrysler minivan for many years and used it exactly as designed, and it was fantastic at its job. But later, after that trend was sort of like too much and too immersed, I would hear young mothers say, "Oh, you'll never catch me in a minivan." It was like, it was no, I don't want anything that looks or acts like that. And sort of coincided with the advent of the SUV, which is, everywhere, a little too prevalent.
Yeah, I think the SUV has destroyed authenticity. I mean, it's all it. Everything just now is a cookie cutter SUV. Every lineup in every company, they may have a token sedan or two, but yeah, I'm tired of the SUV look everywhere, but that's all you seem to see.
There's a famous ad. This would have been probably 20 years ago, maybe more, but it showed this guy working out in the gym, and he's sweating, he's lifting weights. He's around 38 years old, and all of a sudden there's an announcement overhead that it said, "Oh, well, the owner of a beige minivan, please go out to the parking lot. You left your lights on." The guy looks around like, "Oh crap." And it says in big letters right across the screen, "Busted." And of course, if you have a family and young children, there's nothing that makes more sense. But like Stephan said, I guess you both said this, no one wants it. And they all want to be they want this authentically off-road vehicle that's tough and maybe a little bit sinister, but they want something that's tough, that's not a minivan.
And we went on a ski trip last year, and we got upgraded to a all-wheel drive Chrysler minivan, top of the line with the captain chairs. We folded down the third seat in the back. That was the greatest thing to cruise back up into the mountain end, to go grocery shopping, throw the skis in. They're incredibly useful and great tools, do what they do. But you're right, a lot of people just don't want to they just got a bad rap, kind of like the Pontiac Aztec, you just don't want to be caught in one.
Well, I wonder if we will ever see, and this is maybe something for our viewers to comment on, and if you have thoughts on this, please weigh in. Will the overexposure and the immense saturation of every possible profile of SUV out there that is now becoming ever homogenized and looking just alike, do you think we're going to see a backlash from the way overused, heavily saturated, sick of seeing them from every manufacturer of every scope and size SUV profile? Are we going to start seeing sedans and coupes again?
What do you think about this for backlash? That's why EVs are moving faster, a little bit ahead of time, because they don't look like, they're designed to look very different. Even the sedans from Kia and Hyundai, they look very different. The Teslas look very different. Even the Tesla SUVs look different. So I think people are attracted to the electric SUVs because to all the electric vehicles, because they don't look like everything else out there.
I do see a backlash against especially the large SUVs and the large pickup trucks, because they really don't make sense. I do not see us going back to sedans or coupes. My wife has a BMW station wagon. It's a diesel. She loves going 600 miles before she has to get more fuel, but she does not like that she sits low and she can't see over anything. I think the combination of sitting higher and seeing more, combined with it's easier to get in and out of, is really the appeal. And therefore, I do not see that type of a vehicle. And of course, the hatch, a large hatch where you can put your groceries. To me, the utility makes a lot of sense. All the big tires and wheels, that kind of stuff, I see that going away, just like I see the big pickups and the Escalades going away. But a midsize, again, a Toyota Highlander, does that make more sense than a sedan or a station wagon? I think so. Therefore, I don't think it's going to go away.
Yeah,
Well,
they're not going away.
Yeah,
But
sad.
I get tired of looking at them.
I think forever this will be the era that people, when they think about automobiles, are going to see a silver SUV, and it's just way overdone. And regardless of our feelings about that, I do agree the utility is unbelievable. I have 2 SUVs in my driveway right now, and we use them exactly like that. And it's a hard design to debate against, but it's a little bit overdone for sure.
I think that, we got to move on to safety, but I think that I hope the era goes away where you have usually men driving a Porsche GT3. They have no intention of taking to the track, or a Miata. They have no intention of driving spiritedly on a nice back road, or a Defender or a Wrangler. I hope those days go away. You got a Highlander, fine. I don't think you're posing, but if you have any of those other vehicles and you don't use the way it's intended, you're a poser. It's ridiculous. So anyway, I guess we got to move on to safety and just an interesting conversation. We'll see what evolves.
All right, a little bit of safety. So I'm going to start my safety segment with "There I Was."
Thank you, Brett Williams. I can't get that out of my mind.
Yeah, so I was going to work on Tuesday, and I had the bullet, and I just got on the interstate, I-65 North, and 2 miles up the road, I came up. It's in Cullman, Alabama. But you come up a big hill, and we got big hills in Alabama. So you come up a big hill, you go over the top, and then it's a pretty good sweeper to the right. I mean, it's a right-hand turn, and they've had a lot of problems on I-65 with crossovers. And somebody loses control, goes across, kills people on their side. So they put, I don't know if your state has them, but they're basically steel posts with 4 rows of wire running right next to the left lane. So the way the left lane, so I came up over the hill, and I am in the left-hand lane, and there's a truck pulling a trailer ahead of me, and I hadn't even gotten on cruise control yet. I'm probably doing about 70, 75, speed limit 70. And he is well he is well ahead of me. We come up over the hill and start going down the sweeper to the right, and he had just passed a car, and I am passing a car at this time. And I look up, and in the right-hand lane is one of those giant pieces of riprap rock that you see, where they put on the side of interstate for water control, and everywhere. It's called riprap. And I'm like, fuck, there's riprap in the road. And so I see the guy on my right, he's starting to slow down. I can't go to the right because I'm like, oh shit, I got to be ready. And I look, and the truck ahead of me swerves, and his trailer sways, and right there, he straddled in the left lane, which we were in. He straddled a piece of riprap, and it was just to the right side of the middle of the left lane. So I got a guy on my right side who's getting ready he's looking at a piece of rock. I am now looking at a rock, so I can't go to the right. On the interstate, I'm trying to think as quick as I can. On the interstate, you cannot just do a full emergency brake stop. You'll get killed. You can't do that on interstate. So the way is, you got the stripe on the left lane, the yellow stripe on the side. Then you have 1 foot of rumble strip. Then you have 1 foot of asphalt, and then 1.5 feet away is the wire. So you say, don't, look where you don't want to go, basically. But I'm coming down this sweeper now, and it's to the right. So when I look to the left to get out to go to the left side of this rock, I am looking straight ahead at the wire that is turning down the road to the right in front of me. So all I see is wire. So I got 2 tires up on the rumble strip, and I probably, right after I went back through there, had I known more about it, but it's hard to turn left into wire. That I'm like, shit, that would just cut me in half and kill me, because in the Mustang, I mean, you're right there looking eye level at the top of the wire. So I'm like, fuck, I'm going to hit it. And I hit that rock with my right front tire. the front end of the Mustang literally came up in the air and I lost sight of the road. It came up so high. And then the rear tire hit the rock and that threw me into a spin. So I got completely sideways. Somehow I corrected it and didn't go into the wire. I didn't hit the car next to me. So then I just, I'm already off the gas and I knew the car was bad off. And so I'm start drifting to the right, I look to the right. And then as I'm pulling off, getting past, there's now, there's Armco barrier. There's what's it called? The road, the big metal barrier. I'm having a metal guardrail. Yeah. There's guardrail on the right at the entrance ramp to the interstate. So I've got to go past that to pull over to the side. And then the other car pulls in front of me and they took the other rock to the right front, blew out their tire, broke their rim. So it broke both rims of the Mustang, had to have it towed away. And now it's at the repair shop, but absolutely frightening experience. And I'm just amazed. I think if I'd have been in any other sedan that wasn't a sports sedan, the way I hit that, I would have rolled, flipped, lost control but somehow the low center of gravity, the big wide tires, the sports suspension. And I think my recent Porsche driving experience that I've done, the one in Atlanta, the one at Barber, taught me evasive maneuvers on the skid pad, but somehow I managed to correct it, not overcorrect it, which is typical that you do, is you throw the car in a spin the opposite direction. But I gained side of the road, and so hopefully we'll see that. I'm afraid the right front suspension is bent. I know the right rear shock was blown out by the impact. And but the tire just doesn't look right in the front wheel well to me. So they got to wait to get all the new tires or rims, and they'll put it up on the racks where they can actually attach things to the tires and measure and do some measurements. But that wasn't. I do have more safety on that. But well,
Stephan, imagine if you were either looking at your phone or texting and not paying attention.
Oh yeah, I had two hands on the wheel. And the other thing, I didn't have it in cruise control, and thinking about this, driving down the road, exactly, if you're not paying attention, and I didn't want to straddle the rock because I was afraid if I straddled it, it was going to just take out my oil pan or whatever. It was going to take out the entire bottom of my car. So it's like, I really didn't, I just had to make quick decision, what to do. And unfortunately, I could have gone over 5 more inches and probably just barely clipped the rock, but no do-overs in this kind of thing.
That may have thrown you into the wire. And I tell you what's unbelievable
You're
about
right.
you retelling that story, and I know you're sort of compressing it a little bit for time this evening, but listeners, when you're thinking about this, this is what happens. Is these were things you were seeing through the windshield in real time in milliseconds. It's unbelievable. I mean, you're approaching the rock at 70, 75. You're assessing where the door handles of the cars to the right of you, not razor wire, but the wire to the left of you, the vehicle in front of you. And you have to think, oh, what happens if I try to go left? What happens if I try to go right? What happens if I center it? This is, folks, just called situational awareness, and you don't have situational awareness when you're texting. And it sounds like, the age-old advice, every parent, every older person tries to tell you, don't text. But I'm telling you, you don't get the opportunity to make these decisions if you're trying to text. And you probably saved at least your own life, Steph, and no telling what around you. If you hit,
if I'd have hit that car on my right, they would have gone past that. They would, if they would have left the road to the right side, they'd have died. It would have been a horrible, because they'd have gone down a big hill into trees. But it was, and the first thing that was insane about it was that my brain's like, there's a fucking rock. And it was like your brain say, there's not supposed to be a rock on the interstate.
Yeah.
And your brain has to say, yes, there is a rock there. Do something now. So it's strange. You're like, and I've been there before. It's like where your brain, that picture has never been in your head before. And think of how many thousands of miles of interstate you've driven on. Yeah, you'll see a piece of road tire. You might see somebody's couch or mattress. But when have you seen basically a boulder, this thing was the size of about a volleyball is how big it was.
Wow.
Sitting, and my brain is like saying, it didn't make sense. And I had to quickly make some decision. I think because of that pause, I also had less time. I even had less time because I had to say, no, that is a fucking rock, do something. And then I had to make the rapid decision. But it was interesting. It was an interesting experience. And
Obviously,
fortunately,
I echo what Adam said. We're so grateful that you're okay. It could have been much worse. And it does remind me a little bit of the movie Sully, where he lands the plane, he does the best he can, everything's okay. And then the FAA later kind of rakes him over the coals saying, you could have made it back. And he said, all the people that made it back knew what was going to happen. And even they barely made it back. So you got to not second guess things like the FAA did in that movie, or like they did with Sully, and just be grateful that everything turned out. I agree with you. It's a combination of you're paying attention. Number one, that's the most important thing. You weren't distracted. And of course, I love that no one has talked to me over the years more about not driving distractedly than you. And here's an example where when you need to not be distracted, you weren't. You walked the walk. And then the second thing that I think is so great is that your skill probably enhanced by the Porsche experience. You were able to save that spin.
Yeah, it was. And I always drive with two hands on the wheel on the interstate. Always, always, always.
Well, that's a good investment of your time and attention, and certainly a good investment to go to the to the driving experience. And it's just one of those things, we can talk about automotive safety all we want, and have the crash test dummies were not injured or killed in a particular test. Nothing is a better replacement for that than avoiding the big crash in the first place.
Right.
Learning how to do it. Yeah, I'm glad you walked the walk and didn't rock the rock.
You could have. So yeah,
we got time. I got one more quick thing on safety.
Throw it down.
Planned on. I've been planning this for a while, but the
I don't think
collision.
we have time. So I'll just say this: our expert on increasing our listenership has told us we have to keep it less than an hour.
Okay.
And we're if you go more than like 3 minutes, we'll be there.
Well, you already took a minute of my time. All right. So listeners, Insurance Institute for Highway Safety on March 14th did a new study, and what they did is they put some hybrid 3 crash dummies in the back seat of the most popular midsize SUVs, which are carrying kids, and put them in the back seat to want to see how kids were faring in the back seats. Because all these vehicles provide excellent protection for the driver, but there are no regulations for rear-seated passenger in terms of the NHTSA standards. So they threw the kids in the back, and they want to go. I'll just be quick about it here. So it's a small woman and a 12-year-old child, and only 4 of 13 midsize SUVs got good ratings. The Ford Explorer, the Ford Mustang Mach-E, the Subaru Ascent, and the Tesla Model Y. So let me tell you this is surprising. Poor overall, Honda Pilot. Poor Palisade. Poor the Cherokee. Poor Wrangler. The Mazda CX-9, poor, which is what my daughter has. I'm sorry to see that. The Nissan Murano, poor. The only vehicle that got good for driver as well as rear passengers was the Mustang Mach-E. It got a good rating in all categories. But the one, as you can imagine, where the kids did poorly was always in the head and neck. Because what happens is their head is hitting a different part of the door, or the curtain doesn't come down. And some of them, the curtain came down on the other side of the kid's head. It didn't go between them and the door. So I think, if you're driving or you're in the market for a midsize SUV and you're moving your kids around, or you're going to have a lot of backseat passengers, I would definitely take a look at this study by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. And, this decision you make on the vehicle that, I actually wanted, I really want that Jeep. I really wanted that Chevy. Well, you may save a life of someone in the back seat if you get one of these vehicles that has a higher rating. So, and I think it's a great study. And I did one of my initial studies a long time ago where we did some crash statistics, and we looked at car crashes, and I broke people into different height and weight groups. And then people fare differently than the hybrid, the 50 percentile male crash dummy that is used in all those tests. So you do fit the car differently, and you're going to be affected differently from an injury standpoint as well as possible fatality rate. So, but the biggest thing is the restraint technologies in the back aren't quite as good. It's not that the back seat is less safe. The front seat belt pretensioners, the way that they do load reduction, all that has improved greatly in the front seat, but the rear seat has lagged, and hopefully this test will now spark manufacturers to do better for people in the rear seats.
Well, it's interesting, like manufacturers have just adapted. You know, they started with the front seat and they've done crumple zones for the front and rear. They have done steel guards in the door. They've done rollover protection for the roofs. And I guess this is like the next thing is to finally get focused on the back seat, which is incredibly important, especially if you're hauling kids. So yes, yay that is becoming a new standard by which to judge the safety of a vehicle. But of course, the best investment of all still is, folks, if you're out there listening and think you might want to avoid a crash instead of seeing how good the crash standards of the vehicle you're driving are, get into a performance driving school. I don't care if you ever intend to swap paint on a racetrack, just do it. It's fun as all heck, and it may have saved one of our co-hosts.
All right, I'm going to wrap this up, but just one last thing. Listening, listeners, about this rear seat. The risk of fatal injury is 46% higher for belted occupants in the rear seat versus the front. It's a real deal. So take a look at these statistics, and remember to like, listen, subscribe, tell your friends, spread the word about Cars on Call, and listen in for a new episode next week.